Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at the fascinating and honestly, often super complicated dynamics of the modern workplace. But to really grasp the mechanics at play here, we're going to do things a little differently. I want you to imagine treating workplace dynamics exactly like building a physical structure. An organization isn't just some random group of people occupying a space. It's a carefully engineered edifice. And just like any towering skyscraper, well, if the foundational architecture is flawed, if the stresses and strains aren't properly accounted for, the whole thing can literally come crashing down. So how do we actually engineer a resilient, thriving environment? Let's find out by exploring the architecture of industrial harmony.
I actually want you to pause for a second. What truly defines the employee-employer relationship right where you work? Just think about the core dynamics driving your own workplace every single day. Is it a smooth, well-oiled machine where everyone is pulling in the exact same direction? Or does it feel more like a constant grinding friction of competing interests? Understanding the invisible forces beneath that daily grind is exactly what we're tackling today, using some really incredible insights from our source material.
Okay, let's dive into this. There are two absolute fundamental forces in any organization: conflict and cooperation. Every single workplace, no matter how successful it looks from the outside, is a constant, ongoing balancing act between these two opposing forces. On one side, you have the inherent conflict of different roles, responsibilities, and needs. And that pushes right up against the essential cooperation required to actually get anything done or, produce a product. To go back to our architectural metaphor, they're basically the tension and compression of a building. You simply cannot have a standing structure without successfully managing both.
So here are the architectural blueprints for today's explainer. First, conflict versus cooperation. Second, objectives of industrial harmony. Third, the recipe for success. And fourth, approaches and philosophies.
Section 1. Conflict versus cooperation, the balancing act.
Before we can even think about building a harmonious workplace, we absolutely must understand the raw materials on the ground floor. As you can see, industrial relations is formally defined as the study of the employee-employer relationship, a relationship fundamentally shaped by conflict and cooperation. Now, the formal study of industrial relations doesn't aim for some perfect utopia. Actually, scratch that. It's more about acknowledging that managing the inevitable tension between conflict and cooperation is the very essence of managing people. Just think about it. You need management's budget and labor's muscle to actually build the wall, but they are practically guaranteed to clash over the hourly rate, right?
Moving on to Section 2, Objectives of Industrial Harmony, Laying the Foundation.
So what exactly are we trying to build when we seek harmony in the workplace? And this brilliantly illustrates our source material, which outlines 5 clear objectives acting as the foundational concrete of any successful organization. First up, safeguarding interests, so ensuring both the worker's livelihood and the company's viability are protected. Second, actively avoiding conflict before it erupts into something destructive. Third, raising productivity. That's just a natural, profitable result of a smooth-running system. Fourth, fostering democracy, which means giving real voices and representation to the workers. And fifth, reducing strikes, because as literally any site manager knows, absolutely nothing stops construction faster than a walkout. If you don't pour these 5 specific elements into your foundation, your building is basically destined to lean and eventually crack.
Let's look at Section 3, the recipe for success, the structural pillars.
Good intentions and a solid foundation simply aren't enough on their own. We really need strong, load-bearing structural pillars to hold the building up against the harsh elements of the business world. Success requires a highly actionable, step-by-step chain of events. First off, it starts with top management support. The lead architects must be fully invested in harmony. Second, that support has to translate into sound policies, choosing the right materials for the job. Third, we need effective practices. And this isn't just theory. It means having actual, fair grievance procedures where an employee can safely report an issue without any fear of retaliation. Fourth, supervisory training, making sure the foremen on the floor know exactly how to handle the crew and materials. And fifth, follow-up. Think of these as the regular building inspections to ensure everything remains up to code. This whole chain absolutely must flow seamlessly from the top down, because if one step breaks, well, the pillar falls.
Finally, Section 4, Approaches and Philosophies, the Blueprints.
Now, what's really interesting about this is if the steps we just saw are the physical building materials, these philosophies are the different schools of architecture experts use to actually conceptualize the systems of a workplace. Our source identifies 4 broad analytical approaches here. First, the psychological approach looks inward at the individual mindsets, motivations, and personalities of the workers and managers. Then, the sociological approach kind of zooms out to examine group dynamics, power structures, and cultural backgrounds. Next, the human relations approach focuses heavily on interpersonal connections, communication, and overall team morale. And finally, the socio-ethical approach brings in moral obligations, fairness, and justice. Just think about it. 4 completely different architects could look at the exact same company using these 4 different lenses, and they would each identify entirely different structural stresses.
Alongside those broad lenses, our source also highlights some specific, highly influential thought leaders. Let's isolate the philosophy of V.V. Giri. He was a prominent labor leader and former president of India, and his approach centers heavily on collective bargaining. In this particular architectural model, workplace harmony isn't just some mandate handed down from the top floor. It's actively negotiated. Collective bargaining acts as a sort of structural safety valve. It's a formalized process where employees and employers come to the table as relative equals to just hammer out their differences. Giri's approach relies heavily on internal dispute resolution, basically trusting the people inside the building to fix it themselves, rather than relying on any outside interference.
And that leads us right to the final major philosophical framework derived from our source text, the Gandhian Principles. Now, this is a highly unique blueprint for industrial relations. Why? Because it takes a broad, world-changing moral philosophy and applies it directly and practically to the factory floor or the corporate office space. And it does this by relying on a few very distinct foundational blocks.
Our source distills the Gandhian approach down to 4 specific principles: truth, nonviolence, trusteeship, and voluntary arbitration. I mean, imagine a workplace fully constructed with these materials. Truth and nonviolence dictate absolute transparency and the complete rejection of coercive, aggressive tactics by either side. Then there's trusteeship. This is a fascinating, literally paradigm-shifting idea. Wealth and corporate resources aren't just greedily owned, but they're held in trust by management for the mutual benefit of everyone in society. And hey, this wasn't just theoretical musings. Gandhi successfully used these very methods during the famous 1918 Ahmedabad mill strike, proving for sure that nonviolent arbitration could resolve really intense labor disputes. Finally, voluntary arbitration means that when a wall inevitably cracks, both sides willingly choose a neutral third party to mend it, rather than engaging in a destructive strike. It is, top to bottom, a completely cooperative structural design from the ground up.
So, we come right back to where we started, looking at your own organization's architecture. Based on all the blueprints, the foundational objectives, the structural pillars, and the diverse philosophies we've unpacked from our source material today, I want to leave you with this one provocative thought. Is your workplace built on a fragile foundation of conflict, or a resilient, carefully engineered structure of cooperation? Take a really close look at the walls around you tomorrow. You might just see the blueprints hiding in plain sight. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.